Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. This is a follow-up from the recent joint I just recorded a few moments ago before offering Zuhr. So hallelujah, alhamdulillah, baruch Hashem, jai om, shishe mado. So the basic thing to add is when we look at the abuse that men commit against women and that women commit against men, to recognize that the abuse it occurs in both directions, and to be dutiful about that. Now, that being said, what is also beneficial to recognize is that the abuse that women cause towards men results from the abuse that men cause women. I mentioned at the beginning of the joint in the previous one a few moments ago, an observed phenomena. Again, as a man, there are things that I have to be mindful of that. There are things beyond my understanding that concerning women, foundational things, fundamental things. That's the nature, that's the purpose. But at the same time, we can observe things, and we can observe what appears to be, and additionally, it's all the slight appearance. What appears to be, as I mentioned before, is the miraculous and tremendous capabilities that women have of repeating things, remembering things, and then repeating those things, applying those things, sharing those things. But at the same time, on the flip side, what men seem to have the ability of doing that women seem to have a challenge doing is processing principles. So in other words, when a man is taught a principle, when a boy is taught a principle, and like the boy understands the principle, then like the boy is able to apply that principle to further degrees, to additional circumstances, and additionally, like take it to the next level. That's processing. Whereas with a woman, it seems a matter of just repeating the principle and applying it in that context. And the skill that a woman has in applying principles in complex ways seems to be attributed to the woman's ability or a woman's history or experience of hearing those complexities of principles, whether they're far as a lawyer or family member or television, internet, otherwise. But that seems to be the thing. Now, that might sound very condescending. I'm just communicating the appearance of life from the perspective of a man. So with that recognized, I mentioned before at the beginning of the previous joint, God, devil, and woman. And that woman simply observes a man wrestling with himself in that binary, that yin-yang, and repeats to man what she observes from man, just like with Adam and Ahava in the Garden of Eden. So man has no blame towards woman for doing anything, because woman is simply returning to man what man presents to her. So when we look at the abuse that women cause men, the rape, the exploitation, the seduction, and all these other things that are genuinely harmful towards men and that women are responsible and culpable for, to recognize that even in that culpability and responsibility, women are simply returning the abuse that women selves experience, whether that's molestation, abuse from family members, father, brothers, uncles, strangers, clergy, teachers, whomever, and then that woman repeating it towards other men, particularly for the gains that she receives accordingly. So it's beneficial to recognize that. Additional elements again go to recognizing the potency that exists within a man, and potency that exists within women, and how serious and how significant that is. One like a metaphor to utilize is like, if for those who have the experience of drinking alcohol, and like the first time one gets buzzed, or the first time one gets drunk, it doesn't take much. Oftentimes, it's just like, whoa, there it is. A person is very susceptible, very it's that high. But once somebody gets acculturated to drinking alcohol it takes further and further amount of alcohol to get that person to the same kind of buzz, that same type of drunkenness or high or whatever. Same thing with a lot of different drugs and similar intoxications. So there's a similar experience with the sexual potency of men and women. When there is a culture and there's an experience and a behavior of promiscuity, of revealing and sharing the sexual potency in a normalized way, then it can seem less potent. But for those who are sober, who do practice chastity and are exposed to those same types of presentations of sexual prowess, it's like, again, it's like having that first drink and never having any alcohol before. So, and to expect that person to be sober and to be able to tolerate that level of intoxication, just like other people, normal people within society who deal with it all the time, it's recognizing, yo, that's harmful. You just gave a 200 proof shot to somebody who's never drunken before. And religious practitioners that are extremely mindful of this in Islam and in Judaism, in Buddhism, and additionally, that's the guidance: is to be modest, and not to look, to be and to avoid contact, physical contact, in addition to avoid situations of being exposed to that type of sexual prowess, powers, temptation, and seduction, because it's aware, like, once that seed is there, it does things to a man's mind, and like, it's very difficult for that man to deal with it in a healthy way. So the guidance is to abstain from even just being in those situations, because it's that powerful. So when society pretends or feigns that potency doesn't exist, that shows how drunk and how unhealthy the society is when it's communicated, oh, people can express themselves the way they want. Anyways, all right, so that's that. Now, there is an element that goes into the trying to think of how much further to do this. I talked before about pedophilia, and so pedophilia is there's a certain distinction in this conversation, and so pedophilia in and of itself is a whole nother atrocity. It's a whole nother, like, heaviness aside from just this. So this right here, as it is difficult enough for many people already to deal with, like, pedophilia beyond just this notion of masturbation and pornography. It's like, yo, come on. But what I will say is that how children are abused, at this very moment, and the effects of that abuse. How a 7-year-old girl who is molested by her father, by her brother, by her uncle, by her cousin, by her teacher, and additionally, from that moment, and continually from that moment, as much as that abuse is conducted, she has that susceptibility of causing that abuse to others, to other boys, seduction, as a 7-year-old girl. And we have to be extremely careful about that, because it's not a matter. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just going to leave it at that, and just keep that at that moment. But just to recognize, it goes much further than that. But just to recognize that what happens, the consequences of those types of heinous abuses, those atrocities, for many others, accordingly, from a person that young. So there's that. I'll share something on a different topic whilst I'm here. This is something that just keeps occurring to me, so I'm just going to voice it just whilst there's this quasi window. When we talk about faith in God, faith just as a phenomenon, when we get into that, the rationalizations about faith, the rationalizations about God, and additionally, when we talk with atheist kinfolk, and additionally, one thing I share, and I've shared this before, when we have that conversation, very reasonable, very there's legitimate doubts, and additionally, but to have that honest conversation with atheist kinfolk, dear holy atheist kinfolk, and other kinfolk, agnostic or other types of kinfolk, whatever the labels are, particularly that doubt the existence of God, or other kind of similar claims, but specifically doubting or having suspicions concerning the existence of God. So very understandable. There's certain rationale to that, but at the same time, if we're going to have when we have an honest discussion about that conversation, and to recognize how significant it is for people who do believe in God, and to respect that, and not to just to be insulting or derogatory, and just presume those individuals to be stupid and believing in nonsense or whatever else, or gullible or naive or whatever else. I mean, that's falsehood. That's overcompensation. That's ego overcompensation. So to be respectful, that's like a basic thing. But two things to recognize on the part of the atheist, just purely rational. First is to recognize that all phenomena exist. Whatever somebody says, UFOs, aliens, conspiracy theory, it all exists. Pink flying elephants, as an example I utilize, that exists. It's a thing. Now, the consideration, the honest conversation, a rational, reasonable conversation, is to discuss the nature of that phenomena. Is it just a figment of imagination? Is it a delusion, as I think it's Christopher Hitchens or whatever, the author of Blessed Memory, writes the book God Delusion? If it's a matter of recognizing that God exists, but you perceive that belief in God or the phenomena of God as being a delusion, as a manipulation, that's further honest. Then we can have a conversation about that and talk about, we can reason about that. But when kinfolk say that, proclaim God not existing, that's dishonest, because to deny the existence of something is exactly affirming its existence. And so it's a logical fallacy. So for kinfolk who are very boastful about being very logical, to like begin a discussion or an argument, and we don't worry about arguments, we reason. But to begin that kind of conversation with that premise, it's just... So that's first thing, just to recognize God does exist. It's a matter of understanding the nature of God. And again, if it's a proclamation of a delusion, a manipulation, like what's it called, that Wizard of Oz type of situation or whatever, let's reason about that and talk about that. But that's the first thing. God exists. That's just logical. Now, the second thing is to recognize that for the vast many of the atheist kinfolk, skeptics, agnostics, and additionally living in Western society, European civilization, and in the Western Hemisphere, to be honest and recognize that much and most of the understanding that such kinfolk have about God, about the history of God, and additionally, is a very specific framework of religiosity, Judeo-Christianity, and particularly Christianity, and particularly Protestant Christianity, maybe some Catholic Christianity. But the point is that even the atheist's own exposure to the experience of God, or the notion of God, or the belief in God, the concept of God, is a very limited understanding or limited belief or framework of the phenomena of God, excluding the deeply ancient beliefs and continued beliefs from India, from China, from Africa, from Europe, and additionally. So to negate, to have, and there's very strong reasons and rationales for having aversions towards the way God is communicated within Western civilization, very legitimate. But to presume and to discount the existence of God categorically, because of just being exposed to that part of the experience of God, that also is a myopic argumentation. Can't necessarily call it a fallacy, but it is limited. So to presume or to call it comprehensive is a fallacy, because it's not acknowledging the comprehensive phenomena of the understanding and belief of God and relationship with God. So that's the other thing. Just one, God exists. Two, most of people's understanding about God or experience of God is very limited to the Judeo-Christian and particularly the Christian context. So to have an honest conversation about the aggregate entire phenomena of God. It's a matter of having at least some knowledge about the belief and practice and relationship with God outside of Judeo-Christianity, and or just a respect and a willingness to hear what other people's beliefs are. Because when people do that, you see why so many people are Buddhists. See why so many people from Western civilization flock to India and are so enamored by Tao Te Ching. So those are just other expressions of God that don't exactly translate to the English language and to the English concepts and precepts. So, but at the same time, it's the same phenomena. So anyways, that's that. One other thing I'll share at the moment is the paradox, the power paradox about free will. So I got to work on this one. The paradox is that free will is exactly dispowering. And I have to work on like how to articulate this in an increasingly succinct manner. This is comparatively newer joined. But the idea is that free will, individual, the seeming common perception or presumption about free will is being able to do something that an individual wants, independent from the wills of others, what other people want, what other individuals want. But in actuality, when we look at just the basic phenomena of free will, it's actually very much dispowering, because the binary or the complementary isn't a matter of what an individual free will vis-a-vis another individual free will or the collective of other individuals' free wills. It's actually like an individual free will and the omni will. And is that coded, veiled terminology for God? But if you just recognize omnipotence or omniscience as a phenomena, whatever you want to call that, free will being a distinction from that. All right, yeah. It's getting a little bit cloudy here now. And the weather is getting darker too. I don't know if this one is visible. This is not that much. All right. When a person articulates the distinction of free will, that person is separating the individual self from the omni. And that is tremendously weakening, because the omni is the omni. There is the perception of other individual wills, and so the free will perhaps wanting to distinguish and preserve itself amidst the perception of the other individual wills, but is essentially simply the omni and the semblance of individual will. And the militance of the individual being individual is the weakening of isolation. So the purpose of this, what I'm sharing right now, is not necessarily to advocate just amalgamation. The amalgamation already exists. It's a matter of being harmonious, like the rains and the sunshine, the snow and the summers. The fierce individualism is actually a separatism that renders the the semblance of the individual further susceptible to the undue influences of the perceived wills of the perceived semblances of others. Something like that. Walking at this moment outdoors is a different, has a different prospect. I'm looking outside, just like pouring down raining now, with thunder and lightning. I could have been at my destination already. Rain subside. But instead I recorded this joint. Yay. Alright, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to share at this moment whilst I'm here. It clears up for a second. Don't know how long that's gonna last though. Yeah, serious. Let's go. Peace and blessings.